So imagine I handed you this beautiful historical painting.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right. And it clearly depicts George Washington crossing the Delaware River. But the plaque underneath it, the actual text, keeps describing him, fighting off polar bears in the Arctic tundra.
Well, that would be a pretty confusing museum exhibit.
Exactly. I mean, you wouldn't trust the map, right? You would immediately assume someone just glued the wrong picture to the wrong story.
Yeah, you wouldn't try to invent some wild scenario where a polar bear somehow migrated to 18th century New Jersey.
No, of course not. You would just say, hey, this setting is wrong. And that is exactly where we are starting today. Because for this deep dive into the source material, we are looking at a researcher who claims that for centuries we have been looking at the completely wrong map for one of the most widely read, heavily scrutinized texts in human history.
And we are definitely venturing into a space that makes, well, a lot of historians and theologians equally uncomfortable.
Yeah, for sure.
Because people find immense comfort in knowing where things happen. I mean, settled geography is essentially the bedrock of any historical narrative.
It's the foundation.
Right. And when you start moving the tectonic plates of where a story took place, the entire superstructure of how we understand that story, the economics, the politics, the warfare, the very identity of the people involved, it all has to be rebuilt from scratch.
Which is our exact mission for this deep dive. We are unpacking a radical, and I mean meticulously researched, geographical reinterpretation of Quranic history. And the vital thing to understand here, especially for you listening, is that we aren't looking at outside historical myths or, centuries of assumed tradition today.
No, we are looking solely at the text itself, treating the words on the page as our primary unfiltered map.
Right. And all of this attribute discovery, this incredible analysis, belongs to Dr. Khaled Waleed.
Yeah, Dr. Waleed is the architect behind this entire paradigm-shifting analysis. He has developed a methodology he refers to as a Quranic algorithm.
A Quranic algorithm. I love that phrasing.
It is fascinating. His work essentially attempts to strip away the centuries of traditional geographical assumptions. He argues that the true geographical theater of the Prophet Mohammed, and crucially all the previous prophets mentioned in the text, was actually the Levant.
The Levant. So not the desert?
No, not the deeply arid Hijaz Desert in the south where Mecca is traditionally located. He maps the foundational events of Islamic history to the region spanning modern-day Jordan and Palestine.
Okay, I need to pause and just set the stakes for you, to the listener, because they are astronomically high here.
Yeah.
We are talking about relocating the foundational events of a major world religion by roughly 1,000 kilometers.
It's a massive shift.
It's huge. So the burden of proof for Dr. Waleed's Quranic algorithm has to be incredibly rigorous. And just to be super clear for everyone tuning in, our goal today is absolutely not to endorse a specific theology or take sides on any religiously charged topics.
Right. We are just here to impartially unpack the textual and geographical evidence he presents. We are just looking at the research.
Exactly. We are going to stress test this algorithm. And to do that, we have to start with the dirt, the physical environment. Because before we can talk about who these people were, we have to figure out what they were eating and how they were surviving.
Yeah, the literal ground they walked on. Dr. Waleed begins his analysis with what he calls the botanical fingerprint of the Quran.
The botanical fingerprint.
Right, because any foundational text, especially one that claims to be a direct address to a specific group of people, it uses the immediate observable environment as its primary rhetorical tool.
I mean, that makes sense. You talk about what people know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It uses metaphors the audience can actually see, touch, and taste. So when Dr. Waleed runs his algorithm on the flora mentioned in the Quran, a very specific ecosystem emerges.
Okay, what kind of ecosystem?
Well, the text repeatedly references figs, olives, pomegranates, and grapes. It even swears oaths, saying things like, by the fig and the olive.
Right, I've heard that.
It talks about gardens of grapevines and pomegranates as everyday, mundane realities for the people being oppressed.
Okay, but I'm trying to visualize this, and my brain immediately hits a wall. Because the traditional setting is Mecca, right? Which is in the Hijaz.
Yes, deep in the Arabian Peninsula.
And that is a brutal, hyper-arid desert environment. I mean, its native flora consists of date palms and isolated oases, maybe some thorn bushes, and just desert shrubs.
Exactly.
You do not have sprawling, terraced hillsides of olive groves in a desert that gets, a few inches of rain a year, if that.
You've identified the core geographical friction that Dr. Waleed points out. The cultivation of olives, figs, and grapes at an agricultural scale requires a Mediterranean climate,
Right, they aren't desert plants.
Olives in particular, they require a very specific chill hours requirement in the winter just to set fruit. And they require a specific pattern of winter rainfall.
And the Hijaz just doesn't have that.
No, the Hijaz does not have a winter rainy season. It does not have the chilling hours. But the Levant, the hills of Palestine and Jordan, has exactly this climate. And Dr. Waleed notes that the text constantly speaks of rain reviving the dead earth, which is a seasonal cycle that perfectly matches the Mediterranean winter rains of the Levant.
But is completely alien to the erratic, unpredictable flash floods of the deep desert.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm struggling to let go of the traditional narrative just yet. Let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
Mecca was a famous trading hub, right? They were on the major caravan routes. Isn't it entirely plausible that the prophet's audience was just importing olive oil and dried figs from the north? Like, they knew what an olive was because they bought it at the market, so the text uses it as a metaphor.
It is a logical defense. It's the first thing most people say. But Dr. Waleed anticipates it by pointing to the specific Arabic verbs used in the text.
Oh, really? What do the verbs say?
The Quran does not speak of these items as imported luxury goods arriving on a camel's back. It speaks of them as local agricultural realities that the audience is physically managing themselves.
Like farming terminology.
Yes. The text commands the audience to eat of its fruit when it yields and talks explicitly about, quote, what you grow.
What you grow, not what you buy.
Right. It references the pressing of oil from the trees. Furthermore, it talks about the believers taking refuge in visible, safe villages.
Visible, safe villages.
Yeah, so Dr. Waleed argues that the language indicates an agrarian society deeply tied to the cultivation of the land, not a nomadic or purely mercantile society that's just purchasing imported goods.
So the text is definitely talking to farmers, not just merchants.
More than just farmers, actually. They are living in a connected, settled infrastructure. Dr. Waleed posits that the true Qura, which translates to the mother of cities, the central hub of the revelation, is actually Petra.
Petra, in modern-day Jordan.
Yes, located in modern-day Jordan. Petra was this massive, ancient, carved stone metropolis right in the heart of a Mediterranean climate zone.
Right, the famous treasury building carved into the red rock.
That's the one. And the Quran describes a network of these visible, safe villages connecting the mother of cities to the blessed land.
Okay, so a whole network.
And if you look at the topography of the Levant, you have a continuous elevated network of stone towns leading from Petra all the way up the mountain ridges to Jerusalem.
Oh, because they're built on the heights.
Exactly. Because they are built on the heights, you can literally see one village from the next. It forms this visual, connected corridor of civilization.
Which brings us to a massive logistical problem for the traditional map. Because if they are down in the Hijaz, they are isolated, right? Just miles of empty sand between settlements.
Very isolated.
But Dr. Waleed highlights a specific phrase regarding a daily routine that breaks that isolation completely. The morning and evening commute.
Yeah, this is where Dr. Waleed's algorithm really moves from climate to cartography. The Quran frequently warns its audience by pointing to the ruins of destroyed past nations.
Right, as a kind of cautionary tale.
Exactly. It uses them as a physical, observable threat. And the most prominent example is the people of Lot.
Lot, right.
Historically and archaeologically, the destruction of the people of Lot maps to the cities of the plain, Sodom and Gomorrah, which are located at the basin of the Dead Sea.
Okay, the Dead Sea.
And the text explicitly tells the prophet's audience that they pass by these specific ruins morning and evening.
Wait. If I pass by something morning and evening, it's on my way to work. It's literally in my neighborhood.
Exactly. Dr. Waleed calculates the sheer logistical impossibility of this on the traditional map. Mecca is roughly 1,000 kilometers south of the Dead Sea Basin.
1,000 kilometers.
To suggest that an audience living in the Hijaz was passing by the Dead Sea morning and evening in their daily routine is geographically absurd.
Yeah, 1,000-kilometer journey by camel takes weeks. You aren't doing that twice a day.
No, the phrasing morning and evening denotes a local, everyday vicinity. It places the audience physically adjacent to the Dead Sea Basin.
Okay, so let's synthesize this for you listening. If we follow Dr. Waleed's algorithm and accept this physical setting, so we've got an agrarian Mediterranean society cultivating olives, living in connected mountain villages, and commuting past the Dead Sea, that fundamentally changes the social structure.
It changes it entirely.
We aren't dealing with disconnected tribal nomads in a barren wasteland anymore. We're dealing with a settled, highly structured society. And where you have heavy, settled civilization, you have heavy, organized institutions.
Yes, you do.
So who exactly was the prophet arguing with? Because the traditional narrative says he was surrounded by pagan idol worshippers who, circled stones and had basically no concept of monotheism.
Right, and Dr. Waleed's algorithm tears that sociological assumption down completely, because if the geography shifts to the Levant, the religious identity of the opponents shifts from tribal pagans to entrenched, institutionalized scriptural scholars.
Wow, okay, unpack that.
He focuses intensely on the worship identity described in the text.
Yeah.
There are specific verses detailing how the opponents of the prophet prayed at the sanctuary. The text says their prayer is nothing but muka and tasdiya.
Muka and tasdiya. I know enough Arabic to know those aren't your standard words for prayer. What do they actually mean in a liturgical context?
Well, muka translates to whistling or the blowing of horns.
Blowing horns, okay.
And tasdiya translates to clapping or rhythmic collective chanting. So Dr. Waleed asks us to apply basic sociological logic here. Does a primitive polytheist worshiping an idol of stone in the deep desert perform a highly structured liturgical prayer, a salah that the creator would even acknowledge as a form of prayer, albeit a deeply corrupted one?
No, polytheistic worship is usually highly transactional. You sacrifice a goat to the rain god so it rains.
Right.
You don't have a formalized liturgy of blowing horns and chanting as a substitute for monotheistic remembrance. It just doesn't fit the profile.
Exactly. Dr. Waleed points out that muka and tasdiya, the blowing of horns and rhythmic chanting, perfectly match the known, historical, and deeply corrupted liturgical rituals of the temple priests in Jerusalem.
The priests in Jerusalem, the people of the book.
Yes. Even after the physical destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans, the priestly class and their liturgical tradition survived. These elites used the shofar, the horn, and highly orchestrated rhythmic chanting to maintain their authority over the sanctuary.
To essentially drown out true, quiet, spiritual remembrance.
Exactly.
So Dr. Waleed is arguing that the text is describing the corrupted liturgy of Israelite priests, not the chaotic dancing of desert pagans.
He is. And he reinforces this with a really vital theological clue hidden in plain sight. It's the concept of istighfar, which means seeking forgiveness.
Seeking forgiveness, right.
The Quran mentions that God would not punish these opponents while the prophet was among them and while they were seeking forgiveness. Dr. Waleed stops the algorithm right there and asks a brilliant question. Why would a polytheistic pagan who worships multiple stone idols and doesn't even believe in a day of judgment ask for forgiveness from a single, unseen God?
They wouldn't. You only ask for forgiveness if you have a theology of sin.
Right.
You have to believe in a covenant, you have to know you are actively breaking it, and you have to believe there is a single ultimate judge you need to appease.
Exactly. Seeking forgiveness requires a pre-existing monotheistic framework. It requires deep scriptural knowledge. So Dr. Waleed concludes that the people the prophet was engaging with were highly educated scholars.
Oh.
They were Israelite priests and jurists who had corrupted their own texts and practices, but still operated within a monotheistic worldview.
This is a massive paradigm shift. Dr. Waleed is essentially saying this early struggle wasn't a battle against primal ignorance. It was a battle against institutional corruption.
Yes.
It was a battle of scriptures between someone bringing a new revelation and an entrenched religious elite who had twisted the old revelation to maintain their monopoly on power.
And it changes the entire tone of the Quranic dialogues. It explains why the arguments in the text are so heavily based on nuanced legal technicalities, dietary laws, and theological history.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
You don't argue the fine points of ancient covenants and dietary restrictions with someone who worships a tree. You argue them with a rabbi or a temple priest.
Right. Okay, but if we are dealing with scriptural scholars in the Levant, how deep does this institutional link actually go? Because if Dr. Waleed is right, we should see explicit connections to the historical religious authorities of that specific region, shouldn't we?
We should, and we do. Dr. Waleed finds them in the numerical codes of the text. He points to what he calls the Code of the 70.
The Code of the 70.
Yeah, this is a fascinating piece of textual forensics. In the historical narrative of Moses, we know he was commanded to choose exactly 70 men from his people to represent them.
Right, the 70 elders.
Historically, these 70 elders evolved into the Sanhedrin, and the Sanhedrin was the supreme religious, judicial, and political body of the Israelites in Jerusalem.
Right, 70 judges sitting in the chamber of hewn stone.
Exactly, making the ultimate decisions for the community. The number 70 is practically synonymous with Israelite religious authority.
So how does that connect back to the Quran?
Well, apply Dr. Waleed's algorithm to the Quranic text regarding Muhammad dealing with the hypocrites within his own community. The text tells Muhammad that even if he asks for forgiveness for them 70 times, God will not forgive them.
Wait, I always read that as just an idiom for, a lot. Like
Hmm.
saying, I told you a million times. Couldn't it just be a rhetorical flourish?
It could be if we ignore the surrounding context, but Dr. Waleed argues that in a hyperlinked document addressing scriptural scholars, numbers are rarely just rhetorical flourishes.
Okay, they have specific meaning.
He argues the number 70 mathematically and rhetorically targets the 70 judges of the Sanhedrin.
Oh, wow.
The text is telling Muhammad that he is facing the exact same institutional opposition, the exact same judicial corruption that Moses faced.
That is so specific.
If Muhammad were in the Hijaz dealing with disconnected desert tribes, the number 70 would have absolutely no cultural or political resonance. But in the Levant, the 70 is the ultimate symbol of entrenched religious authority.
It's like reading a leaked political document today that keeps referencing the 535.
Exactly.
If you know American politics, you don't need a footnote to tell you that means the voting members of the United States Congress. The original audience inherently understands the weight of the number.
They get the reference immediately.
So Dr. Waleed is saying that when the text says 70, it's a direct link to the courts of Jerusalem.
Yes. And the opponents themselves make the connection explicit. Dr. Waleed highlights a verse where the opponents of Muhammad are confronted with his revelation, and they explicitly compare his book to the book of Moses. Yeah. They call the Torah of Moses and the Quran of Muhammad two magics that support each other. Or, in some translations, two sorceries that back each other up.
Stop right there. Why would a pagan in the middle of the Hijazi desert, who supposedly knows nothing of monotheism, care about the Torah of Moses?
They wouldn't. They wouldn't know enough about the Torah's legal structure to claim that Muhammad's book was functionally supporting it.
Obviously not.
Dr. Waleed emphasizes that only the Israelites, the people of the book, would make this highly specific comparison. They made it because they recognized the legal, theological, and geographical continuity.
They saw the parallels.
They saw that Muhammad was preaching the same message in the same land, threatening the same religious authority that Moses had threatened centuries earlier. They were the exact same demographic audience, living in the exact same region.
Okay, let me just recap this for you listening, because this is building fast. So the algorithm has given us Mediterranean crops, a daily commute to the Dead Sea, corrupted temple prayer rituals, the Sanhedrin of 70, and direct comparisons to the Torah of Moses.
It's a lot of data points.
It is. The local geography is firmly locked into the Levant at this point.
Yeah.
But we can't just look at a few mountain villages. I mean, if this is a major historical event, it has to exist within a broader economic and geopolitical framework. How does Dr. Waleed zoom out from the local level?
He zooms out by looking at the water.
The water.
When you run the algorithm on the economic indicators in the Quran, it speaks to a society that is intimately familiar with and heavily reliant upon the sea.
Okay.
It describes commercial ships moving through the ocean like mountains. It talks about the community eating fresh meat from the sea, diving for pearls and ornaments. It even relays a narrative featuring a king who seizes ships by force to control trade routes.
Again, looking at the traditional map, Mecca is landlocked. I mean, it is separated from the Red Sea by a brutal stretch of coastal desert.
Very difficult terrain.
A society of inland camel herders does not use massive mountain-sized ships as their primary metaphor for divine majesty and economic prosperity. It just doesn't track.
Dr. Waleed argues this completely demolishes the idea of a landlocked Hijazi epicenter. If the center of the revelation is Petra and Jerusalem, you are looking at societies that had access to and control over massive global maritime ports.
Right.
The Nabatean kingdom, which was centered in Petra, historically controlled the port of Aqaba on the Red Sea. Jerusalem and the Levantine corridor had direct access to the Mediterranean port of Gaza.
So they weren't isolated.
Not at all. These were not isolated caravan outposts. They were maritime superpowers.
Yeah.
The people walking these streets saw ships like mountains unloading global cargo every single day.
This provides a completely new lens for one of the most famous early chapters in the Quran, actually. The one that talks about a trade route of winter and summer.
Yes, the Quraysh chapter.
Traditionally, I've always heard this explained as camel caravans heading down south to Yemen in the winter and up north to Syria in the summer. Does Dr. Waleed throw out the caravans entirely?
He shifts the medium from sand to water. Dr. Waleed aligns the winter and summer journeys perfectly with ancient sailing seasons.
Sailing seasons.
Yeah, because in antiquity, Maritime trade was strictly governed by monsoon winds and weather patterns. You have 4 months of winter sailing in the warmer waters of the Red Sea, heading south toward India and Africa. Then you have 4 months of summer sailing in the Mediterranean, heading north and west toward Europe.
Okay, let's do the math. 4 months of winter sailing, 4 months of summer sailing. That leaves 4 months unaccounted for in a 12-month year.
And what separates these two massive commercial sailing seasons in the Islamic calendar?
I don't know. Why?
A 4-month spring season known as the sacred months.
Oh, wow.
A period dedicated to pilgrimage when fighting and hunting were strictly forbidden. This allowed people from all over the known world to travel safely to the sanctuary.
That is perfectly balanced.
Dr. Waleed argues it is a perfectly balanced year-round maritime and religious calendar. It only works logically and economically if your society is positioned exactly between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean.
Which puts you right in the Levantine corridor.
Exactly.
But, being a maritime superpower positioned between continents means you're a highly valuable piece of real estate. And that puts you right in the crosshairs of global empires. Does the text reflect that level of geopolitical tension?
It explicitly names the superpowers. The text mentions the Romans, the Byzantine Empire.
Okay.
It states that the Romans were defeated in Adna Allard, but predicts they will be victorious in a few years, an event the believers were closely monitoring and would eventually rejoice over.
Let's translate Adna Allard. I know Adna can mean nearest or lowest in Arabic. Is the text talking about, like, a political low point for the Romans, or is Dr. Waleed reading this as a literal topographic coordinate?
Dr. Waleed reads it as literal geological topography, the lowest land.
The lowest land.
Historically, we know the Sassanid Persian Empire launched a massive, devastating war against the Byzantine Romans in the early 7th century.
Right, the Great Byzantine-Sasanian War.
Exactly. In 614 AD, the Sassanids captured Jerusalem in a horrific siege. And where did the defining battles of this Levantine campaign take place? Geologically and literally, the lowest exposed point on the surface of the Earth is the Dead Sea Basin, sitting over 400 meters below sea level.
Adna Allard, the lowest land on Earth.
Dr. Waleed points out that this was the Dead Sea Basin. The text says that the believers were right there, closely monitoring this exact event.
This is where the geography changes the entire motivation of the characters. I mean, think about it. If you were living in a remote desert 1,000 miles south in Mecca, why on earth would you care about a Roman territorial defeat in Jerusalem?
You wouldn't.
It doesn't affect your daily life. But if you were in the Levant, positioned between Petra and Jerusalem, your entire economy, your ships like mountains, your winter and summer trade routes is suddenly paralyzed by this apocalyptic war between the Persians and the Byzantines.
You are trapped right in the crossfire.
Exactly. The geopolitical stakes aren't distant news. They are immediate and existential. You are watching empires clash in your backyard.
And this mention of the Dead Sea Basin, the lowest land, brings us to what is arguably the most spectacular deep-time geological theory in Dr. Waleed's entire analysis.
Okay, I'm ready.
He doesn't just use the geography to map the Prophet Muhammad's era. He uses it to connect multiple prophets to one exact physical coordinate on the map across thousands of years.
I'm strapping in for this one. We are talking about the geological choke point, the Dead Sea Barzakh. How does a textual algorithm uncover deep-time geology?
It starts with tracking a very specific phrase in the text, the Fulk Mashun, which translates roughly to a heavily loaded commercial ship. Dr. Waleed tracks how this phrase is deployed in the Quran. It is used prominently in the stories of both Noah and Jonah. Both narratives revolve around the Fulk Mashun.
Right, Noah's Ark, loaded with the animals, and the commercial ship Jonah was thrown from into the sea.
Right. Now, Dr. Waleed connects the story of Noah to a highly specific geological event described in the text regarding the start of the flood. Furan al-Tanur.
Furan al-Tanur, what does that mean?
This translates to the boiling over of the oven or the erupting of thermal springs.
Oh, wow.
Dr. Waleed posits a deep-time geological scenario based on the Great Rift Valley fault line. Before Noah's flood, he argues, the Red Sea and the Dead Sea were actually connected via a deep, navigable water trench known as the Wadi Araba.
So it wasn't a land valley, it was a continuous waterway.
Yes.
A massive maritime highway cutting straight through the Levant.
Exactly. Massive ships, the Fulk Mashun, could sail straight through from the Red Sea up into the Dead Sea region. But then a massive tectonic shift occurred along the fault line.
An earthquake.
The Tanur, the thermal springs and tectonic plates literally boiled over. This seismic activity caused waters to rise dramatically, initiating the localized flood of Noah and altering the topography forever. When the waters eventually receded, the landscape was permanently broken.
What did this tectonic shift leave behind? Like, what does the map look like now?
It left behind what the text calls a barzakh, a physical land barrier, and a hijr majur, a forbidden partition.
A physical partition.
Yep. Dr. Waleed identifies this physical partition as the Lisan Peninsula. If you look at a satellite map of the Dead Sea today, the Lisan is a large piece of land that juts out from the eastern shore, effectively separating the deep, ancient northern basin from the shallow southern basin.
So this geological cataclysm severed the ancient maritime highway, turning the Dead Sea into an isolated lake.
That's the theory.
That is a massive claim to pull from a few words in a text. But let's assume the Wadi Araba was once flooded and then blocked by the Lisan. Where does the algorithm go next?
Dr. Waleed's algorithm uses this newly formed land barrier to lock multiple prophetic timelines together.
Okay.
Because when the water receded and created this barzakh, it also created a literal dry path across what used to be a sea. Dr. Waleed argues that this exact spot, the Lisan Peninsula in the Dead Sea, is the exact location where Moses parted the waters to cross from the west, near Jerusalem, to the east, toward Petra.
Wait. The parting of the Red Sea is one of the most famous stories in human history. He is moving it from the Red Sea to the Dead Sea.
Well, the Hebrew text actually calls it the Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds, which has always been heavily debated by scholars. But geographically, crossing from the Egyptian-controlled side of the Sinai or Judea into the safe haven of the east matches crossing the Dead Sea Basin eastward toward the mountains of Seir and Petra.
Okay, I track that.
But the algorithm doesn't stop with Moses. It brings us back to the Prophet Mohammed. Dr. Waleed argues that the defining battle of Muhammad's early mission, the Battle of Badr, happened at this exact same geological location.
The Battle of Badr. But every historical tradition places Badr as a small town in the Hijaz, south of Medina. How can he possibly move the Battle of Badr to the Dead Sea?
He bypasses the traditional names and relies entirely on the topographical description provided in the Quran itself.
The physical layout.
Yes. The text describes the exact layout of the battlefield at Badr. It says the believers were positioned on the Adwa Dunya, which is the near bank.
Okay.
The enemy army was on the Adwa Qaswa, the far bank. And the commercial caravan they were trying to intercept was moving below them.
Below them.
Dr. Waleed argues this is a perfect, literal topographical description of the Dead Sea Basin in the Wadi Araba Trench. You have two elevated banks, the eastern and western ridges, and a deep valley floor where the caravans traveled.
Wow, that matches perfectly.
Furthermore, he points out that ancient Byzantine maps mark a settlement just west of this specific crossing area near the Lisan as Badoro. Badoro. Dr. Waleed's thesis is that the physical location of divine intervention is fixed by the geography, only the era and the prophet change.
I need you listening to just visualize the profound theological weight of what Dr. Waleed is proposing here. He is basically saying the Quran has placed a giant glowing red X on a geological map of the Wadi Araba.
Yes.
Geology and theology are locking together like gears in a watch. I mean, imagine the narrative power of the Prophet Muhammad fighting his defining battle for survival on the exact same patch of dry seabed where Moses defeated the Pharaoh's army and where Noah's massive commercial ship once sailed before the earth literally broke apart.
It creates a layered, hyper-condensed, sacred geography.
It really does.
It means the prophets aren't just sharing a theoretical message across time. They are walking in each other's literal, physical footsteps. They are engaging with the same physical earth, bearing witness to the same geological scars left by divine intervention.
Which transitions perfectly into the next phase of Dr. Waleed's analysis, the tale of two cities and the shift of names.
This part is fascinating.
Because once he has pinpointed this specific geography around the Dead Sea, he begins to map the spiritual journeys of the prophets across this landscape. And he finds a stunning pattern hidden in how their names are actually spelled.
Yeah, this is where Dr. Waleed merges linguistics with cartography. He sets up the map based on how the text categorizes the land. To the east of the Dead Sea, where Petra is located, is the Holy Land, Al-Ard al-Muqaddasa.
The Holy Land to the east.
And to the west of the Dead Sea, where Jerusalem is located, is the Blessed Land, Al-Ard al-Mubaraka.
Holy to the east, blessed to the west, separated by the Dead Sea Barzakh.
Exactly. Now watch what happens to the identities of the prophets as they physically move across this map. Dr. Waleed looks closely at the spelling of Abraham's name in the original earliest Quranic scripts.
Okay, the spelling.
When Abraham is a young man, searching for truth and rejecting the corrupted idols of his people in the East, which Dr. Waleed identifies as Petra. His name is spelled Abram, without the Arabic letter Ya. It's a shorter, incomplete spelling. But once he migrates across the Dead Sea barrier to the west and is established and builds the true sanctuary in Jerusalem, his name shifts in the text.
It changes.
It becomes Ibrahim with the Ya.
It's a literal, textual change in identity triggered by a geographical arrival. I like to think of it like a monarch taking a regnal name, you know.
Oh, so?
Well, like when Prince Albert ascended to the British throne, he became King George VI. The new title is inextricably linked to taking the seat of power. The identity doesn't change until the throne is actually reached.
That is a brilliant analogy, and Dr. Waleed finds the exact same pattern with the Prophet Muhammad. Yes. Before his migration, when he's in the East seeking truth and struggling against the corrupted priests of Petra, he is referred to in the text as Ahmad, which means the seeker, or the one who praises.
Ahmad.
But after he successfully migrates and is established as the leader of the community, he becomes Muhammad, the established, the highly praised one.
It transforms the story into an epic hero's journey, where reaching the physical destination actually changes your status in the eyes of the divine. The geography itself is an active participant in the revelation. You cannot separate who they are from where they are on the map.
For Dr. Waleed, the core journey of the prophets is always a migration across this specific Dead Sea barrier. It is a recurring algorithm.
They all do it.
They flee the corrupted, entrenched religious establishment of Petra in the east to establish or reclaim the true, purified sanctuary in Jerusalem in the west.
If that is true, how does Dr. Waleed redefine the famous Isra, the night journey? Because traditionally, the Isra is viewed as a miraculous 1,000-kilometer overnight flight on a winged creature from Mecca in the Hijaz all the way to Jerusalem.
Under Dr. Waleed's geographical framework, the Isra ceases to be a 1,000-kilometer flight across the Arabian Peninsula.
Okay, what is it then?
It becomes a local, highly significant internal migration within this blessed and holy Levantine corridor. It is a movement from the Masjid al-Haram, which he argues was the original heavily corrupted sanctuary in Petra, across the valley to the Masjid al-Aqsa.
Valley.
Al-Aqsa translates literally to the furthest boundary of the sanctuary, which Dr. Waleed locates at the Dead Sea and Jerusalem.
It's a tactical and spiritual journey across the valley, a crossing of the Barzakh to claim the ultimate spiritual center.
And Dr. Waleed notes this isn't just Muhammad's journey, it is the standard operating procedure for all prophets in the Quran. They all migrate from the corrupted mother of cities to the blessed land. They all cross the water. They all face off against the corrupted priests.
It's the algorithm.
Exactly. Dr. Waleed argues that removing Muhammad from this specific geographical corridor breaks the textual and narrative continuity of the entire Quran. It literally orphans his story from the rest of the text.
Okay, if we accept this massive premise that the early Muslims were not in Mecca, but were in the Levant, fighting in a geopolitical war involving the Romans and the Persians over control of the Jerusalem corridor, it leads to one final glaring question.
How do they win?
Exactly. How do they actually take back the city? Because Jerusalem is a mountain fortress. It is surrounded by the Kidron and Tyropoeon valleys. You can't just march a desert army up Mount Moriah unnoticed.
Definitely not.
It is incredibly difficult to conquer, which is why sieges there usually lasted for months and ended in absolute slaughter.
And this brings us to Dr. Waleed's most startling and frankly cinematic historical reimagining. And it has to do with how he interprets a very specific, very famous Quranic command regarding clothing.
We are talking about urban camouflage.
Yeah.
The code of the hairdim. Break this down for me because this blew my mind when I read the notes.
We have to look at the tactical situation during the time when the believers were maneuvering to take back Jerusalem from the Sassanid Persians and their local Levantine allies.
Right, the tactical situation.
The Quran issues a command to the prophet's women and the believing women. It commands them to draw their jilbabs, which are heavy, full-body cloaks, and their kaimars, which are specific head and face veils, closely over themselves.
Okay, I know these verses.
But the stated explicit reason in the text for this clothing mandate is so they would not be recognized and harmed.
Now, traditionally, I have always heard this taught as a general modesty decree for everyday life. You know, a rule about how to dress appropriately in public to avoid harassment in the desert.
Dr. Waleed completely rejects the general modesty interpretation by looking at the Levantine context. He links this command directly to the traditional garb of the hairdim, the deeply Orthodox Jewish communities native to Jerusalem and the Levant.
Paradigm.
If you look at the historical continuity of Levantine Orthodox Jewish dress, and even if you go to Jerusalem today, you will see Haredi women wearing heavy dark cloaks and head coverings, and Haredi men wearing distinct heavy uniform clothing.
So it's a very specific look.
Dr. Waleed argues that this Quranic verse was not a general modesty decree for a desert climate. It was a highly specific tactical military command for urban camouflage.
I am genuinely stunned by this.
Yeah.
Dr. Waleed is arguing that one of the most intensely debated clothing mandates in global history started out as literal stealth gear for a special ops mission into ancient Jerusalem.
Look at the geography and the geopolitics. You are a relatively small force trying to infiltrate a heavily guarded mountain fortress city occupied by hostile forces, the Persians and their local allies.
Right.
If you walk up the mountain passes looking like a foreign invading army or looking like outsiders aligned with the recently defeated Romans, you will be identified immediately and slaughtered. You have to disguise yourself to get inside the walls.
So by adopting the heavy black cloaks and face coverings typical of the local native Haredi civilian population of Jerusalem, the believers could blend in completely.
Precisely. They could move through the subterranean tunnels and water shafts, which Dr. Waleed notes the Quran refers to when it describes the enemy coming from below you, and they could navigate the steep mountain passes described as from above you without raising any alarms.
Because they looked exactly like the local civilian population.
Exactly. It allowed the believers to infiltrate the city and position themselves for a coordinated siege from within the walls.
That is an incredible reframing of the text. It shifts the narrative from a simple desert skirmish with swords and horses to a highly sophisticated, high-stakes urban infiltration in one of those heavily contested, heavily fortified cities in human history.
It is literal geopolitical espionage.
It changes everything about how you read those verses. Dr. Waleed's algorithm insists that every word in the text, whether it's about an olive, a ship, a number, or a cloak, has a functional, geographical, and historical purpose tied explicitly to the Levant.
It's all connected.
Okay, let's take a deep breath and synthesize what we've just covered. We have put Dr. Khaled Waleed's Quranic algorithm through its paces today.
We really have. We started with the botanical fingerprint, the olives and figs, proving a Mediterranean agrarian climate rather than an arid desert.
Right. Then we tracked the daily commute past the Dead Sea to see the ruins of Sodom and Gomorrah.
We looked at the sociological shift from desert pagans to the priests of the Sanhedrin with their temple whistling and chanting, and the mathematical link of the 70 judges.
We examined the macroeconomic maritime trade ships like mountains, the winter and summer sailing seasons aligning with the sacred months, and the geopolitical reality of the Roman defeat at the Dead Sea Basin, the lowest land on Earth.
We dove into the deep time geology of the Dead Sea Barzakh, placing Noah's flood, Moses parting the sea, and Mohammed's defining battle at the exact same physical coordinates at the Lisan Peninsula.
We tracked the linguistic shift in names Abram to Ibrahim, to Muhammad, as prophets migrated from the holy east of Petra to the blessed west of Jerusalem.
And finally, the tactical stealth infiltration of Jerusalem using Haredi clothing as urban camouflage.
I want to speak directly to you, the listener, for a second. Think about how much geography shapes our understanding of truth. When you change the map, you change everything.
Everything.
You change the motivations of the characters, the economics of their society, their battle tactics, and the very core of their religious identity. Dr. Waleed's analysis forces us to read the text actively, to interrogate it forensically, rather than passively accepting the maps that were handed to us centuries after the events took place.
And if we pull back and connect this to the bigger picture, it leaves us with a profound, almost unsettling realization about the nature of history itself.
How so?
We place an immense amount of trust in the traditional boundaries and borders drawn for us by past scholars. But what happens to our understanding of the world if the foundational map is fundamentally wrong?
Which brings us back to where we started, that painting of George Washington. Sometimes you think you are looking at a clear, settled picture of the past. But upon closer inspection, you realize you're looking at a complex, murky landscape that requires a completely different lens to decode.
It raises an important, lingering question to leave you with. If a simple change in geographic coordinates can turn a story of isolated desert nomads into an epic geopolitical thriller involving Roman empires, global trade routes, deep-time geology, and secret subterranean sieges.
Wait, I have to jump in. What other historical texts might we completely misunderstand simply because we are holding the wrong map?
Exactly.
That is definitely something for you to mull over. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the source material.